Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Beth Chats Books. Now today is going to be a very long wrap up because I have a lot of books to get through, so I'm just gonna crack on with it. So I'm gonna recap you on where I am at with the Tony Parsons books. So since we last spoke, I have read The Hanging Club, which is the third book in the Tony Parsons DCI Wolf series, and I've also read Tell Me When He's Dead, which is the short story that's in between, I believe, the third and the fourth novel. I might be wrong, but there is 3 novellas and there is 6 books. So I've read book number 3 and the final novella that I needed to read. I gave book number 3, The Hanging Club, 4 stars. I gave the novella 3 stars. Then I've also read Girl on Fire, which is book 5, because I'd already read book 4 Die Last first. So I gave Girl on Fire 3.5 stars. And I have the final physical book, which is book 6, which came out last year, which is Taken, which I mentioned in my last video. So overall, I'll just recap that I'm really enjoying this series. The novellas aren't quite as engaging as the main stories, and particularly Die Last and Girl on Fire. They tended to be, their main stories consisted of a terrorist ring and a human trafficking ring, and they weren't as enjoyable to me as the first 3 books in the series, which dealt with serial murders and spree killers and finding the killer. I know that this is going to be about a girl that's taken, so I'm not sure if it's going to be similar to the last 2 books in the series so far, but I'm excited to read the last one and hopefully round off the series. I don't know if he's planning to write any more books in this series, so that might be a big fat lie. There might be more of these coming out, but really enjoying this series. I don't love it as much as the Cormoran Strike books by J.K. Rowling, just because I love Cormoran Strike so much, but this is a quite close second at the moment. I haven't got an extensive backlist of series, crime protagonists and crime series that I've read, so I can't comment on many crime protagonists, but I enjoy Wolf and I'm really enjoying the series, and I'm hoping to get to the Gamosh series and the Nikki French series. So this has been a nice filler to kind of enjoy a crime protagonist and a series of crime thriller books. So there's that. Then I read The Death of Vivek OJ by Akwaeke Emezi, and I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. So I want to thank NetGalley and Faber and Faber for giving me a NetGalley approved ebook of this title. I found this book incredibly moving and beautiful. So it follows Vivek, who is not really your stereotypical male in Nigeria, where this book is set, and he has some secrets that he keeps from his parents, and he has this romance and a brotherly love relationship with his cousin. It does bleed over into a romantic relationship. They do end up having a sexual relationship, the 2 male cousins, which obviously they keep from the family. But then he has a group of friends who accept him for who he is. He cross-dresses and he has 2 separate parts to his personality, a female part and a male part, a feminine and a masculine, and there's not a lot of plot involved, and it does all border on the tragedy. We know from the beginning that Vivek is going to die, but I thought the story was written in such a beautiful and heartbreaking way. Vivek was a really well fleshed out and complicated character, and a very lovable character with a lot of nuance and depth to him. I think his cousin also was a very interesting character, at how he had this conflict between this toxic masculinity and the perception of masculinity, and how he's been raised in contemporary Nigeria, but then the constricting feelings he has for his cousin and how that affects his masculinity and his sexuality and how he sees himself. A fantastic book, and I have not read enough from this author before. I know Pet, that they have also written, has blown up BookTube in the past, so I would definitely recommend this author, and I will go back and read other works that they've done, because the storytelling was absolutely beautiful in this story. Highly, highly recommend this book. Then I also read Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, which I took out of the library on ebook. And I was very disappointed with this book, actually, to be honest. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I think the premise is good, and it's a really interesting book to raise this conversation around white privilege and Black Lives Matter and racism in the US today. But the two white characters that are living in the main protagonist's world are both incredibly damaging and toxic, and they made for very frustrating reading. This novel follows Amira, a black African American who is babysitting to earn money. I believe parts of it are set in New York and parts of it are set in Philadelphia, I want to say. I can't remember, so I can't exactly remember where this was set because I've read it such a long time ago now. But she ends up working for a white middle-class family as a babysitter for their daughter, their oldest daughter. And then one day she's asked in the middle of the night, she's at a house party, it's midnight, early hours of the morning, to attend the house because there has been an incident. Someone's thrown a rock through the glass window of the property and they're calling the police, and they think that the daughter will be very distressed. So they ask Amira to take the child and just occupy her for a couple of hours until the police leave. So she takes them to this very middle class, bougie supermarket that sells very expensive selection of nuts and artisan food, and the little girl loves this place. So she ends up taking her there, and her friend meets her there, and the long and short of it is one of the white shoppers there is a bit suspicious of why this black woman has a white child with her, and gets the security guard involved because she's worried that Amira has kidnapped this child. From there is where the story flourishes, and I won't ruin any more because I know a lot of people have used that as a synopsis for this book, so I know I'm not spoiling too much. But the lady who she works for and the white man in the supermarket who films her as a form of protection while the incident happens with the security guard play really pivotal roles in the story. But they're always from the beginning against Amira, and I know that this is because the author wants to raise awareness of how white privilege and white people befriending black people is problematic, and how both of these white people in this narrative use and abuse Amira for status, for acceptance, for a whole plethora of different reasons which aren't really positive. But I found it really depressing, and at one point in the book it kind of plays against your better judgment. It wants you to make a choice between who is the better of the two white people in Amira's life, and they're both as vile and insidious as each other. I just found those two characters awful, and I was reading this book and realising that the author has probably experienced this in America on a daily basis. The way people talk about black people in this novel, the way they talk at black people in this novel, the way they make assumptions, the disgusting way in which white middle-class privileged women are trying to befriend black people. And it really reminded me of Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ning. I haven't actually read the book, but I saw the adaptation on Prime, and the way that Reese Witherspoon's character is, it's very similar, and it makes me very uncomfortable. So really, my low rating isn't anything to do with the writing or the book. I just don't think it was my book because I couldn't get past these things, and so it ultimately meant I didn't enjoy the book. But I can see why so many people do. And it's a rude awakening, for me particularly, about the ways in which white people might have less violent intentions but are still doing a harm to the black community, even when they think they're being nice. So it gave me a lot of food for thought on that topic. Then I read Unicorn by Amru Al-Kadi, and this is a memoir of Amru, who is the drag queen Glamru, who lives in the UK, and it's about him coming to terms with his identity, his queer identity, how he found drag, which helped him through a really low period in his life. It's a very intense look at his relationship with his mother and how he adored his mother, and his mother finding out that he was homosexual and that he was a drag queen, and how that fractured his relationship, how he's a Muslim and his queer identity doesn't fit in with the Muslim narrative, but then how later on in the book he tries to fight against that, and he joins a group in which they are all queer Muslims and they are reinterpreting the Quran in a positive way, and how the Quran is such a subjective text. People have predominantly enforced a reading on it that dictates that it's homophobic when that isn't necessarily the case. It's the same with most religious texts. We assume things that really, the texts are so subjective that you can easily argue that that's not the case, which I found really refreshing in that particular chapter, how there is a Muslim queer group who are appreciating their Muslim heritage and celebrating their queerness in sync. But overall, this is a very beautiful memoir. It's very haunting. I was fascinated with his relationship with him and his mother, and how he would often spend a lot of time looking through her jewellery and her clothes and helping her pick outfits, and how he came to terms at the end of the memoir with the concept that his feminine Glamru identity directly comes from his affection and love for his mother, and it's him emulating her. It is a very Muslim Arab style of dress that he wears as Glamru, and it's almost a love letter, his performances, to his mother. So I found that quite beautiful and profound. I also found his relationship with her quite difficult at times, and the homophobia was quite difficult. But I read this on a recommendation from Savage and Sykes Book Club because it was one of their picks, and really enjoyed it. I took this out the library as well, and I read it on ebook, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I just found him really interesting, and I love anything to do with drag, as you probably already know. So obviously a memoir from a drag queen was just perfect for me, and I love that he has a Muslim identity because it really gives a different perspective, and I applaud people who have enough courage to come out with their queer identities when they are raised in an environment or community or family when it's especially difficult to do. And I know that coming out as queer in a Muslim community is very difficult, so I applaud him on that, and I found that a really interesting angle to look at. Then I read Expectation by Anna Hope, and I found it a little bit dull. It's 3 friends who have been best friends, and it follows their lives together. One's trying to get pregnant and is really struggling. One has just had a newborn child with a man that she wasn't really seeing for that long, and she had a bit of a shotgun wedding and she's questioning where she's going with her life. And the third one is a struggling actress who has lost her sense of purpose. I didn't really like any of the main women, so I didn't really care. Slight spoiler, one of them has an affair with the other's husband, which I also found really frustrating. I thought the characters were so selfish and the plot was pointless because it seemed like everyone was doing whatever the hell they wanted regardless. Their friendship wasn't very genuine to me. I think they were friends that were superficially friends at school and have managed to, school and university life and college life, and have managed to stay together on the very thinnest of threads. One of the women, she has them all round for a party and she's getting really drunk and she's really unhappy with the guy she's seeing. It's the lady that has the newborn child. Nobody seems to be supporting her. They seem to be condemning her. And so she doesn't really get the support from her friendship groups that I would have expected. And then later on in the book, she makes a lot of digs and jabs about how she hates being a mother, really tactlessly in front of the one character who can't have children and really wants them. And then at the end it had this kind of nostalgic look back at their relationship, and then the future, they had this big reunion, the sun was shining, a perfect day kind of ending, which didn't feel very satisfying and realistic to me. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I would recommend, if you like women's fiction, to give it a go. I know so many people love this book, so I was really expecting to enjoy it, but talking about the book to you guys now has solidified in my mind that I really didn't actually like the book, whereas at the time I didn't really think I felt this negatively about it, but there we go. And then I read The Searcher by Tana French, so I was given this as a review copy by NetGalley, and this is published by Penguin UK. And this was another book that I really wanted to enjoy and just didn't really. So this follows an American retired police officer who moves to a really remote area in Ireland, and he is renovating a cottage property, and this poor urchin child stalks his property over the coming weeks and befriends him with a request that he helps the child find their missing brother. Now, I've seen a lot of people since I've put my Goodreads rating and review that this isn't her most popular work. I know she's done the Dublin Murder series and a few standalones, and I think the writing was fantastic. The sense of spookiness, of unease, of trepidation and anticipation was fantastic. I just don't think I liked the plot. I think I found the plot a little bit slow. I was in the atmosphere. I really thought the location was perfect. But towards the end, I was thinking, come on, where are we going with this? And I think the general consensus is that this book is slower than her usual books. I haven't read anything else from her. But it made for a plodding kind of feeling for me, which I don't like to have with my books. But the writing was really good. I can see why she's so beloved, and I will definitely read more from this author. But this one just didn't kind of hit that satisfaction, compulsion, compelling level that I needed it to and that I expected it to. And then I read a really short little children's picture book called Tiny Little Brother. I read this because it was one that many moons ago NetGalley had given me, and I just wanted to review it and read it so that I could kind of up my NetGalley score a little bit there. It was only 100 pages, it was some pictures, and it was just a very brief relationship between a sister and her brother, and the sister has a few mental health issues that the little brother wasn't aware of, but it's seeing it through a child's eyes and the child not really registering how the sister was coping with her mental health. So it was just short and sweet, and I enjoyed it while I was flicking through it. It literally took me about 15-20 minutes, so I gave it between 2 and 3 stars. It was just something to do. And then I read I Cant Sleep by J.E. Rowney, which I got a review copy of from Ferocious Readers Only, and I really loved this one. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It had that really creepy, not sure what's going to happen vibe to it. I think the ending was slightly disappointing, but I like that it didn't go with a more satisfying ending, because I think for a lot of crime and thriller writers, there is that temptation to stop themselves or to round it off in a more palatable way than leaving things hanging. But when I say the ending disappointed me, I don't mean the actual ending of the plot, but there was a little kind of epilogue bit at the end that took me a little bit out of the story, but the last few pages of it were really very consuming reading, and I found it really clever. and you were right there in that moment. You had a bird's eye view of what was happening, and you kind of felt out of control as a reader reading it, but you couldn't put it down. So I thought it was really clever because it played on that psychological feeling of some kind of unrest, and she's questioning her sanity. The main protagonist is at university. She's got insomnia. She hasn't been able to sleep since her brother died, and she's had psychiatric help, and they've assessed that she's well enough to go to university, but she's having terrible insomnia. And as the book develops, you realise that her friends are starting to question her sanity. She herself is starting to question her sanity, and her mum's worried for her at home. She thinks she might need to see someone again, and she's questioning all along whether it's all in her head, and it plays on that wonderfully. So if this intrigues you at all, I would certainly go and check it out. I think it's been released in paperback now since I'm speaking, so I think you can get it online. But if you just want an escapist standalone romp of a story of what's really going on and is it all in her head or not, then you'll really enjoy this book. I certainly did, so I gave it 4 stars. And then I've got Memorial by Brian Washington, which I read on NetGalley. I was approved for this by Atlantic Books, and I feel quite conflicted about this book because the 2 main protagonists, Ben and Mike, were really interesting, but the plot was just a little bit too slow for me. So it follows these 2 men who are in a homosexual relationship with each other. The beginning of the novel starts with Mike is leaving to go to Japan because his father is dying and he wants to go and look after him, but he has picked his mother up from the airport and left her in the flat with Ben while he goes back to Japan to see his dying father. So Ben is African American and he works as a childminder, child carer at a nursery, playgroup kind of thing, and he's left alone for the majority of the novel with Mike's mother. Then we kind of have both perspectives from Ben and Mike when Mike's in Japan, then from both Ben and Mike when Mike returns, and when they send Mike's mother back to Japan. So Mike's parents are separated and Ben's parents are separated, and it's looking at their relationship from the perspective of both characters, acknowledging that their relationship has hit a dead end as such, and this might be the end of the road. There was a lot of navel gazing and stargazing and questioning, a lot of nostalgia and reminiscing on certain things. There was a lot of sex in this novel, but not happening between the 2 main men that were in a relationship with one another. But it was very floaty and slow for me. And now I know this author is known for writing poetry or short stories, but not necessarily novels, so I think maybe a few of my niggles might be ironed out as this author progresses into novel writing. It might just be issues with changing the writing format for this particular author, because the character development was fantastic in both the main protagonists, but the plot was quite slow and there wasn't much progress, and it was kind of left quite ambivalent and quite open about where these characters were going to go. And I thought I'd be okay with that, but I found it quite frustrating. I wanted to know what was going on, and their feelings about each other were quite frustrating because they communicate separate things to other people and internally that they wouldn't communicate very well with each other. So yeah, I think this author has amazing potential, and I will read anything else that they write, and I want to go back and read Locked by them, but I don't think this was my kind of book. A lot of people have raved about it on Goodreads. I've seen some fantastic reviews of it, and if it interests you, please go and check it out. But I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars because it just didn't rock my world. And then the last book I read was Bone Chyna by Laura Purcell. Now, this was another Savage and Sykes Book Club read recommendation. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I actually quite enjoyed it, and then I have recently just watched the video that Simon Savage and Melanie Sykes did on the book club video of this pick, and a lot of the things that they were saying were quite valid. the timelines were a little bit confusing, and there was a lot packed into a very short novel in terms of it wasn't an epic big novel, and maybe it could have either been an epic saga novel or two separate novels, because the maid Hester Y, we go through her last posting at a separate house and what happened there with her and her mistress, and then she travels to Cornwall and she saves a man's life, and then she comes to Morveen House, Moravon House, I forgot what it's called now, and she looks after Miss Pinecroft, who is an invalid. And then we go back to 40 years earlier when Miss Pinecroft's father lived here, and he had convicts living in a cave outside the property of the house who were ill with consumption, and he was a physician and he was trying to cure them of consumption. So there's a lot of playing around with timelines. Obviously, Miss Pinecroft is the only consistent part of the novel. She's in both timelines. But it's interesting because Simon Savage was saying in the video that they were saying it's Miss Pinecroft's novel, and he said, I think it's Hester Y's, the maid's novel, which I agree with. It is her novel, and it plays around with the gothic. Laura is very talented at writing this gothic sense of something's not quite right with the house, but it's a bit like The Woman in Black. It will play with sounds, and temperature was another thing that Simon Savage mentioned, how she could describe beautifully how a room was cold and you could imagine it, and then the warm fire, and the sense of unease and unrest that she plays with, which she did really well in The Silent Companions, which was one of my favourite novels in the year that it came out. And she did it very well in The Corset, the slight unease and you're wanting to know. But The Corset was a bit more impressive for me, and The Silent Companions again so. But I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, this novel. I did really enjoy it, and she's one of those authors that whatever she brings out, I will read, because I find her a very talented historical fiction writer, a very talented gothic writer, and I really like her books. So that's everything that I've read recently. So, as I mentioned, I'm planning to read this so I can finish the Tony Parsons Wolf series. And I mentioned in my other video, but I'll quickly show you that I have Bluebird by Attica Locke. I have Joyce Carol Oates' Night, Sleep, Death, the Stars. I have Atessa Moshfeg's Death in Her Hands. I have Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. I have Holding by Graham Norton. I have The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Dari. And then I have picked up my other reservations. So I have The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I'm very excited to get to this one. And I have How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang. And I also took out the library because I can never actually go without taking more books. So I have Conjure Women by Afia Atakora. And I have Rodham, very excited, by Curtis Sittenfeld. And I also have Still to Read on ebook, an ebook from the library currently. I still have The Shadow King by Marza Mingesti. I have The Guest List by Lucy Foley, and I have Pine by Francine Toon. And I have 2 more NetGalley books that I've got to read. I technically have 3 now. So I have The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. I have The Shape of Darkness by Laura Purcell, which is her newest novel. And I have Sleepless by Louise Mumford, which is a psychological thriller. So they're all the books that I need to get to. I will be getting through them November and December, because all of my library books I have till the 1st of December before I have to take back. Some of them have already been reserved for that period of time, so I need to get to them before that. But that's everything. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new video. Bye now.